is fun to have all the new people here. Feels a bit like the cool kids came to our class. You need to know this is our home. You are welcome in our home, and we love having you here. I stand before you as a person who has got his learner's motorcycle license twice. Who else can say that? Twice. Just me, all by myself. The first time I got my learner's license, you just went in and wrote a test, and if you passed the test, you got your learner's license. And I went with a friend of mine who had never in his life been on a motorcycle, and I'd ridden dirt bikes and motorcycles and that sort of thing, and he passed and I didn't. That was about 30 years ago, and he has still never thrown his leg over a motorcycle, which annoys me. I got it the second time. And I rode a motorcycle. I had a CB 750, which is, for those of you that don't speak bike, that's about the most common bike there was in Canada. Everyone had one. And it was a good first bike. And then I bought a bike to replace that, actually from a guy who used to come to this church, a guy named Daryl Hawes. And I bought a Suzuki GS 850. And I rode that for a while. And then came a time when my wife and I had to move to a different province for school. And when we moved to that different province and we tried to transfer my license over, they said, your driver's license for a car is fine, but we will not honor the learner's motorcycle license. That was about when my wife and I were starting to have children, so we were doing minivans and Cheerios and diapers and that kind of stuff, and there wasn't enough for a motorcycle, so it really wasn't a problem. A little while later, my kids grew up a little bit, and a friend came to me and said, we should get our motorcycle licenses. Well, what a good idea. The rules had changed, though. This time, when you went to get your motorcycle license, they at least wanted you to be able to identify what a motorcycle was. And so you had to take this class. And in truth, when I went to and by class, what I mean is you're in a parking lot and someone has put pylons down and they've made a course, and you will spend 2 days doing different skills on this course. And if you can successfully do these skills, then at the end of it, you'll have your learners. And in truth, I went into it thinking that I was kind of a seasoned rider. I had several years of riding, no crashes, no real incidents to speak of. So I figured I was going to just breeze through this class. And when I got there, what I discovered was the things that they were making me do, I had never done before. I sincerely hadn't. And they were teaching me things about motorcycle riding that when I was done the class and I got my learners, I knew walking out of there, I was a better rider than I ever was before. I sincerely was. And so I'm a fan of the motorcycle course. I think it makes people good riders. And there were skill sets that I had that would keep me safe, and then it would also keep you safe. And this was a good thing. So I was thankful for the teaching. I was thankful for a person who was a better rider than I, who had practiced and could teach me how to do it. Actually, in our congregation, we have someone who teaches young people to drive cars. And many young people drove cars. If you're a farmer, you've probably driven cars, not on the roads, only on the fields, before you had your license. Yet there is schooling that needs to happen. And so, Dean, we thank you for that. And you are an instructor to our children. That instruction is important. We have got a method of instruction in our lives, and I think most people's here lives, that gives us great confidence, and it is called YouTube. How many of you, by raise of hand here, how many of you have built something entirely on the instruction found on YouTube? Go ahead, put up your hand. Yeah, call it out. What did you build? Spark, yeah. Whoever you are, I want to talk to you after. You sound like a cool person. What else have you built? Trampoline? that what you said, trampoline? Anyone build like a wall or many walls? Anyone fixed plumbing, unclogged a drain, learned how to build a particularly tasty treat, perhaps with chocolate chips in it? And YouTube teaches us this stuff. And so I'm also a fan of YouTube. I am actually, I think I'm pretty near an expert on how to care for lobsters if you turn them into your pets. I have hours and hours into that. I'm not even kidding. I can tell you all about the salt water content and the temperature. And you come, all your lobster questions, come talk to me afterwards and I'll answer them all for you, so long as it's not how to cook or eat them. That one I don't know, but how to care for them, that one I've got. And it's because of the instruction on YouTube. The question is, what did we do before YouTube? And for those of you who are about 25, 30 years old, there was a time before YouTube. It was a very dark time. We did not have lights or music. There was no such thing as rhythm. We didn't know, we just waved in the breeze, just like this. This is all we did. And then someone invented YouTube, and we went ahead and did some stuff. We're starting a new series right now, today, on the book of 1 Peter. And we have entitled it Before There Was YouTube. And we're going to work our way through 1 Peter, but there are a few things that you need to know. And when I say book, this is a letter from a guy named Peter. He's a disciple. You maybe heard of him as the apostle. He's a guy who literally followed Jesus around and literally learned the stuff that Jesus taught, and then he went and he wrote a bunch of letters, and this is one of them. This is the first one, 1 Peter. And he's teaching to people who live in a very different context than what we live in. And there's sort of this challenge that comes up oftentimes when people are encountering Scripture and they say, Scripture is for me. And the answer to you is, yes, it is for you. Also, the context is tremendously important. And if you don't take the context into account, you can come up with the wrong conclusion. So let me give you an example of how that might work in today's context. I want you to imagine, bikers, that you are rebuilding your front shocks because they're weeping. Anyone ever been there? I know you have. So you go onto YouTube and they say, go get this tool from Harbor Freight. Go to Pep Boys and pick up your parts. Make sure you're insured at State Farm. Now, I don't know much about you. Some of you I haven't even met, but here's what I know. You don't live near a Harbor Freight. You don't live near a Pep Boys. And almost surely you are insured with SGI. And context matters. It matters tremendously. If it didn't matter, it would mean you couldn't fix your bike unless you went to the States. But I'm telling you that's not true. You can fix your bike right here if you will take the context and wander your way through it and say, that applies to me directly, this applies to me indirectly, but it still applies to me. And if we can do that, then we can journey through the letter of 1 Peter with some certainty. If you find a resistance to this, you're in good company. It's okay. If you have been told that the stuff in the Bible is literally there for you to take literally, that's okay. Let me ask you this question. Where's your ark? You were given instruction. God said Christians, this particular one had a name, Noah. But if it's for you, we know how many cubits by how many cubits by how many cubits. So where's your ark? Or does context matter? Farmers, do you leave standing wheat in your field so that people can come and glean? I have to tell you, when that was written, they could not have imagined what Saskatchewan looked like. where we can honestly say, my farm is 100 kilometers away from anybody else, and if I leave this in the field, nobody will pick it. It'll just rot, it'll be eaten by birds, whatever it is, it's not going to come to a person's mouth. And in fact, if I wanted to go to a person's mouth, I have to combine it all. That's context. Joel, who was up here earlier, one of his favorite ones is saying all through, there's a writer named Paul who will say, greet each other with a kiss. I haven't been kissed much today. I'm kind of okay with that. If you're going to kiss me, you brush your teeth first. I mean it. That's serious. I'm not even kidding around. Context matters. And so as we journey through the letter of Peter, the first one, we're going to talk about context. This letter is addressed to people, we will say in Asia Minor. Really, it means Turkey. And it's being addressed to people, most of them will have had access to the old way, the temple method, the Jewish way. They would have probably gone to the synagogues. They would have been taught the old scrolls, the Old Testament, the Torah, if you prefer. They probably actually would have been taught that well. Some of them would have been pretty happy about it. Some of them weren't real good at being Jewish. It's kind of like where we are now. Some of us celebrate in our teachings, and some of us struggle with it. That's okay. I'm glad that you're here. But most of the people that would have read this or heard this, have it read to them, would have been at least sympathetic to what the teachings were. So what it's not is a letter to a person who firmly doesn't believe. Instead, it is a letter to people who either do firmly believe that Jesus is Lord, that he died and was resurrected, or to people that are willing to have the conversation. And so those are the lenses that we read this through. Some of this is not to us. Some of it is to us. Our job is to wander through and find out what the Lord has for us to learn. I really think it changes how we read the Scriptures. Oh yes, they are for us. But context matters. So let's open. Book of 1 Peter, chapter 1. And I'm going to do something that's going to make all the English teachers very upset. I'm going to start later on in the chapter, and once I'm done that, I'm going to go to the earlier part of the chapter. And I think you'll see why if you come with me. So we're going to start chapter 1, and we're going to start in verse 13. We're going to have it up on the screen here as well, and I'm going to read this out loud to you. You read along with me if you will. Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. Here's a bit of context for you. The people reading this are under persecution. They have had things taken from them. They perhaps have had people taken from them. This is a tough thing. It's not a free, happy-go-lucky time. There's a time when there's great tension here. And so when we read, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed in his coming, there's a direction there that says, don't put your hope in a military resistance. Don't put your hope in a political resistance. Don't put your hope in a very convincing monologue. Don't put your hope in a system that gets created that will make right what is wrong. Don't do that. Instead, focus on Jesus and remember, he's coming. He's coming back. And that needs to be your focus. Let's go to the next slide. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. Now, this is an interesting thing. This is going to affect us very directly. Here's what it means. When you lived in ignorance, there were things that you did not like. Perhaps there were something in politics you did not care for. Perhaps there's something in finances you do not care for. Perhaps there are brothers and sisters in your family that are doing things you don't like. Raise your hand if I'm talking about you. Don't raise your hand. I'm kidding. It'll get you in trouble. It'll make Christmas harder for you. Don't do it. But you ever had a brother and a sister? And they do things, don't they? And if they would just ask you first, you could tell them. Brothers and sisters. And what the teaching is that's the way it was. Now, don't complain. Instead, focus on Jesus and his return. Let me boil this down a little further. This is a wonderful thing to teach if you ever get to speak to someone at their baptism and sort of the last things before they're baptized. You say, I want you to remember this. It's this. Don't complain. Just for a minute, can you imagine what this world would be if Christians as a whole simply didn't complain? They just didn't complain. When something happened they didn't like, they would focus on Jesus. When something happened they did like, they would focus on Jesus. They would invite people who are sad to focus on Jesus. It is not hard to be with someone who doesn't complain. It is really difficult to be with someone who has a pattern of complaint. Can you imagine the radical world change if we just didn't complain? And it's how we're taught. When you lived in ignorance, you complained, but you don't live in ignorance anymore. Now you focus on Jesus, not on the stuff that makes you complain, but on the stuff that says the King is coming. He's coming back. He's coming back. I hear that clearly in what the Christian Motorcycle Association is seeking to do, to going to those places. In our church, we would say least reached places. It just means places that are hard to get to. Can't get there on four wheels. Two might work, a boat might work, airplane. It's part of the DNA of who we are as the Christian Missionary Alliance. We don't complain. Instead, we work hard. We focus on Jesus and we say, is that Great Commission, that one that says go and tell, is that still relevant? Then we better do that. It's part of our DNA. It's part of the reason why this church exists, with that focus moving forward. Don't complain. Let's go to the next slide. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all that you do. Next one. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. Christ in you, changing you. There's an old word that I remember learning in Sunday school when I was a little boy. We don't use it much anymore, but I think it's suitable for today. The word is sanctification. Let me boil it down to just its core, if you'll let me. It means Jesus changes your reflexes. Your reflexes used to be complaint. It used to be, I've been wronged. Those I love have been wronged. Something in the system is wrong. And now what it is, do you know that Jesus is coming back? Do you know he's coming back? We're going to be with him. Together, we're going to be with him. Your reflexes change. Christ in you changes you. And part of the evidence of that is, don't complain. Now, English teachers, forgive me for what I'm about to do. We're going to go backwards. all the way up to verse 6. Let's read this together. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have to suffer grief and all kinds of trials. What I did not say and what the scriptures do not say is that you may not feel grief. Grief is real. Lament is real. As a matter of fact, there's an entire portion of scripture called Lamentations, or Lamentations if you prefer, where we are sad and where we say, God, no. Stop them. Thwart them. Crush them. No. This is bad. I don't like this. But we bring it to God. And we trust that God will do the God thing that God said God would do. I talk about this one a lot. In the story of Moses, do you remember? He's walking, he finds a bush that's on fire, but it won't burn up. And he goes and he has this conversation. Initially, it sounds like it's with a bush, but it turns out that it's with God. And do you remember what God says? It says, I have heard the cry of my people. Not the eloquent words that are so perfectly put together that there's no mistake, but the guttural of my people. Oh yes, you may lament. You may bring that before God, and I encourage you to do so. But our focus is not the lament. It's God, and it's the trust that the solution to the problem is God. So bring it to the solution. Bring it to God. In all this, you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief and all kinds of trials. We'll go to the next one. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, the greater worth than gold, which perishes, even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Christ is revealed. This is one of those verses, or a series of verses, that we so struggle with. Let me try to explain. When hardship comes your way, thank God for it. Why? Because it makes you stronger. It makes your roots deeper. There was a time when my children were struggling, and my wife and I cried out to God, God, remove the struggle. Make their way easy. Clear the obstacles. And God responded in a way that I had a sense of it, but I couldn't put words around it. And my wife heard the words. And she said this, I think God is telling us, do not ask me to deny your children their deserts. The promised land is on the far side of the desert. There ain't but one way to get there. Hook your arm in the person beside you and start shuffling. When you see hardship in your life, and worse than that, in those that you love, be thankful because the depth that is growing. Perhaps you've seen a child learn to walk. They fall many times. Ride a bike. Swim. They're terrified they think they're going to die when they learn to swim. There's usually the long arm of someone who is a better swimmer who reaches and just turns them so that they can breathe and lets them struggle. And they become swimmers. If you've ever taught someone to drive, you've done that. My mom is sitting here, and I remember being taught to cook. And I remember it was hot and we're boiling water, and a bit of boiling water touches your arm and you think, this is wrong. You're not supposed to touch hot stuff. And my mom's hands were not far from me. And she let me struggle. And at the end of that struggle, I can cook. And my children eat because of the struggle. Don't let that you are in a struggle turn you away from the solution. Yeah, there are easier ways, but your roots become deeper. Your muscles grow. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Even though you don't see him now, you believe in him and are filled with inexpressible and glorious joy. Don't complain, even when the going gets tough. Be thankful because of the depth that you're growing, that he is growing in you. One of the obstacles that I had to do and that everyone had to do, I found it to be the most difficult obstacle in the learning to ride a motorcycle, was there was a single pylon. And you must ride your motorcycle in a tight circle very slowly around the pylon. You have to go around it 5 times without putting your feet on the ground. Now, you are welcome to put your feet on the ground any old time you want, but you go back to 0. And if you're going to have your learner's license, you have to go around this. Now, you might not like that you have to do it. You might feel like you're going to fall over, and you might want to put your feet down and then explain why you had to put your feet down. And they will listen to you, and they will nod, and they will not give you your learners. Because to get your learners, what you must do is go around this pylon 5 times. And they say, when you think you're going to fall, instead of putting your feet down, let your clutch out a little bit. It's going to stand the bike up. You are going to go just barely at a creep, but it's going to stand the bike up, and you're going to continue to go around. And then someone who might know more than you say, you might think that you're going to hurt the bike, because if you did that in your car, you'd wreck the clutch. But a clutch in a motorcycle is a wet clutch, and it's not going to wreck it. It's actually designed for it. So just let the clutch out just a little bit. It probably took me most of the day before I successfully went around 5 times in a row. And then when I did, I rode away. And no particular ceremony. They just said, good, you can do that now. They filled out the paperwork. I got my learner's license. And I basically didn't think about it again until I was riding my motorcycle on the streets where you drive with your loved ones in your vehicle. And there was an obstacle in the road. And the hardship that I went through, that I didn't like, that I struggled with, that many times I wanted to say, you don't understand. I was going to fall. I had to put my feet down. I had to complain. I had to. How would anyone else know to be warned of this thing if I didn't complain? But instead of that, because I had been changed by an instructor, I let my clutch out a little bit. The bike stood up, and I slowly and safely rode through the obstacles and out the far side while everyone else struggled their way through. I became a better rider because of the struggle. I became a better rider because someone stood there and listened to me complain over and over again, and at the end of it said, you're very sad. Now go do it again. I didn't like them. They were mean. They should have heard my sad story and bought me pudding. That's what I like when I'm sad. They didn't. They said, back in there, cowboy. So I do not know what obstacles are in front of you. I do not know what obstacles are in front of your loved ones. I do not know your story. And I'm sure if I did, it would be a very convincing story of genuine, sincere pain. I mean that. Can we shuffle through the desert together? Can we not complain, but instead look forward and say, Jesus is coming. My guy didn't get voted in, but Jesus is coming. The cost of this is more than I can pay, but Jesus is coming. The drums are too loud, but Jesus is coming. Can we do that? I don't know what the obstacles are in front of you, but I want you to bring them to the person who solves them. And I want you to grow deeper in your faith. And in that, we will find joy.
Well, I don't know about you, but during that message, for me, all I could really think of for a good portion of that is the fact that I often don't like things that spoil easily. I don't know about you, but I'm really particular with milk. You know, as soon as it gets to the expiry date, I'm like ready to get rid of that milk. And I started thinking about what other things in my life spoil easily. And one of the things that came to mind really quickly was my attitude. My attitude is one of the things that perishes and spoils really fast. And the moment I take my mind off Jesus and the things that he's done for me, that attitude spoils really quickly. In 1 Peter verse 4, it talks about through Jesus Christ, we will be brought into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. In verse 18, it talks about the fact that we are not redeemed with perishable things. And as I read those verses and as Peter was speaking, I realized that my mind was very easily on things that do perish and spoil and fade. But our salvation comes through Jesus. And that salvation will not perish, spoil, or fade. Neither will the relationship and love that Jesus has for us. Despite grief, despite hardships, despite pain, despite trials, it will not perish. It will not spoil. It will not fade. The relationship that we have with Jesus is everlasting. It is eternal. And the fact is, we will all struggle. We will all have pain. We will all go through grief and trials. But when we draw closer to that hope that can only be found in Jesus, that relationship will deepen. We will recognize who is walking by us in those trials, those struggles, and those pains. And I hope that today, as you walk out from here, you can recognize that no matter what is ahead of you as you go out from this place. This morning, if you need prayer for anything, just want people to gather around you for healing or anything like that, come find us in the prayer room. We'll have some people in there to pray with you and anoint you with oil. Or if you just want prayer for someone in your family or anything like that, come find us there. Thank you for being here today. I believe there's a bit of a show and shine happening outside with some of the bikes. I don't know the rules around those bikes because I don't have my motorcycle license. And know that for those of you that are like me that are not allowed to have a motorcycle, there is a commandment in the 10 Commandments: do not covet what your neighbor has, and that'll be me as I go check out those bikes. Anyway, have a great day, everybody. Thank you for being here.